Weaving against the grain, a decolonial approach to life, to unlearn in thinking, feeling, and performing. My name is Monica Lilleike. At the moment, I'm living in Berlin. I feel very fortunate that I have been invited to present this paper at the Asian Pacific Dance Festival 2002. I was born in Windhoek, the main capital of Namibia, an African country known for its desert-like landscape. When I was born, the country was still known as Southwest Africa, and it was under control of the apartheid regime of South Africa. I experienced how the suppression of the Black population fueled increasing civil unrest in Namibia, leading up to a liberation movement carried primarily by the Southwest African People's Organization, SWAPO. The aim was to gain independence from the Republic of South Africa and its politics of apartheid and neocolonialism, which it finally achieved only in 1990. With the atmosphere at the time being marked by a heightened awareness of civil unrest, my parents decided to move to the Federal Republic of Germany in 1978. I was 11 years old when we moved to West Germany. Although being of German descent, I learned what it means to assimilate as a migrant to Germany, since to live in Europe was foreign to me. I had to relearn the language, the codes of conduct, how to engage with an entirely different mentality, and how to handle a different climate. I was troubled in finding my own identity, being white-skinned, yet being born in Africa. This left me with an unresolved conflict of belonging nowhere. This internalized conflict, though painful for many years, turned out to become the compass in my life, a sense which taught me how to choose to rather weave against the grain. The post-colonial theorist Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak made a point in arguing that privilege implies always loss. Taking up Spivak's way of thinking, I argue that to weave against the grain means to critically reflect, in my case, upon my own European upbringing and to tip exactly into the lost part of what privilege denies. It means to undo what one has learned in order to see, feel, and possibly understand what is outside of one's former learning and upbringing. It is a painstaking process at times. Post-colonialism was not out there when I started my educational path and my ongoing inner quest of belonging, questioning the odds of European supremacy, which I had been experiencing in Africa and likewise in Europe. During the early 90s, living in Berlin, I enrolled in theater studies and ethnology at the Free University in Berlin. Additionally, I educated myself in extended vocal art and site-specific performance art techniques. While building my skills as a young performer, I was drawn to the work of Marina Abramović. She focused on the body as the core material of her experimentations, extending the boundaries of fine arts towards body art. In one of her performances, Interruptions in Space from 1977, Abramović and her partner Ulay were again and again running and forcefully bouncing their naked bodies against two pillars of an indoor space. The performance did resonate with how troublesome I experienced the rigidity of what it means to embody European identity. The piece triggered my own imagination and burning quest to overcome the painful feelings of yet unresolved dislocation and uncertainties of identity tied to my own migratory experience. I was seeking to learn more about so-called non-European arts and other forms of knowing and feeling. Envisioning to study in person with artists from other cultures, I started to research for such a possibility and discovered the Asian and Pacific Performance Art program offered at the Theater and Dance Department of the University of Hawaii at Manoa, UH. My application was accepted. The first 6 months of my training at the UH Theater Department was focused on a main stage production of the classical Jingju opera Salangtan Mu. Jingju professionals from Nanjing Opera from China were invited to train our students. This initial main stage production introduced me to the master-disciple method, an immediate and face-to-face learning situation that takes place between stage professionals and students. The selected group of students had to submit themselves to an intense daily training of in-body techniques, learning how to perform the segments of stylized dance acting tied to the respective roles we were expected to enact. Likewise, we were trained in singing and reciting the vocal parts according to the aesthetics and style of Jingju. We were challenged to learn how to adapt the skills to perform based on close observation and repetition of enactments following the lead of the masters. The result was an entirely new experience of Jingju performance aesthetics, distinct from any European aesthetics I had been exposed to previously. During my study at UH Theater Department, I learned that the master-disciple teaching method is fundamental both to Asian as well as Pacific theater and dance traditions. In mind that most cultures develop their own form of theater involving dance and storytelling, I was curious to learn about Hawaiian cultural practices. I enrolled in classes on hula at the Music Ethnology Department. Those courses were taught by well-known hula masters. The training provided an introduction to the art form, with hula masters insisting still on hula being taught outside of university at so-called halau, according to traditional protocol based on long-term study. My first attempt at a field study on hula based on ethnographic techniques of interview and participant observation failed, since hula masters, my chosen informants, declined any interviews. I realized that the scientific methods I intended to apply to my field study were not suitable for the study of the art of hula. Reflecting on my first experiences on learning according to the master-disciple method at UH, which focused on embodiment and face-to-face training situations, and reminding myself about how Marina Abramovich, used her body as the prime means of her artistic research, I chose to find out what the capacity of the body was for cultural learning beyond those categories I was familiar with, seeking out to become a regular student of hula at Halau. I was fortunate that Kumu Hula John Lake accepted me into his beginner's class in August 1997. At Halau Mele, I embarked on a cultural journey, participating in classes on traditional hula and chant known as Oli, learning about traditional protocol of hula and other Hawaiian cultural practices and crafts related to the art of hula. The training under the tutelage of Kumu Hula John Lake initiated an ongoing process of unlearning while studying hula at his halau. I would like to summarize 6 aspects of unlearning that I have been experiencing during my ongoing studies and practice of hula so far. First, learning hula entails a gradual process of immersion into a vast amount of embodied knowledge transmitted from the Kumu Hula to Nahau Mana, the student body. Embodied knowledge of hula encompasses all faculties of the human being, the soma including the senses. This means to learn, to think, to feel, and to perform, accepting that all faculties of the performing and sensing body is part of knowing. This did not fit into my previous European education. Instead, hula students acquire through the immersive quality of long-term training the capacity to master an intricate interplay of various performative elements, such as sound, body in motion, gesture, and voice, all of which is part of the artistic expression. These distinct performance practices are tied to the specific aesthetic features and qualities that shape multisensory experience conveyed as part of hula. Hula speaks through means of embodied knowledge and conveying in and through performance. Second, the path of learning hula is accordingly multisensory and multi-directionally. Hula training and performance involves a team of hula performers, the olapa, and the percussionist singers, the ho'opa'a. Hula is based on an intricate interplay between the olapa and the ho'opa'a, which I had to learn, involving a practice of call and response between the groups. Third, practicing hula means to embody history here and now. History meets present tense. Performing hula means to transgress the authority of Western perspective on history, which is based on written accounts only. Fourth, as students, we were trained according to the master-disciple method, which is based on close observation and repetition of enactments following the lead of the kumu. We students had to listen, to observe, and to follow the actions of the master teacher of the senior students. Questions and commentary were not allowed. To approach the master at will was not an option at all. we had to stand back and learn to be patient. New beginners were trained to stay in the back to follow those in the front, respectively. This protocol and training implied to unlearn, not to comment, and not to ask questions at will during training. This would interrupt the focus and the flow of embodied and sonic experience while training hula. Learning evolved through continuous repetition and observation. The performance itself became evidence of the student's progress. Fifth, to become a member of Halau implies to accept taking on the responsibility of continuous cultural practice of hula as part of Halau. The Halau embodies an institution of practice, a way to secure cultural continuity, a living process of tradition building and transmission. Participation at Halau is based on strong reciprocal relationships among those who practice hula. And last but not least, sixth, in my research, I applied the concept of embodiment as an important tool for developing a scientific method of inquiry into embodied knowledge, as specified in the notion of my work as practice as research. However, analytic and discursive procedures, as these are the strongholds in Western education and science, or in trying to capture oral traditions and performing art forms in books only, does not encompass to cover the depth of such practices of embodied knowledge, being passed on by means of the master-disciple method. To continue to support and to encourage educating cultural specialists at Halau is necessary. Kumu Hula John Lake has been one of those esteemed hula masters who decided that every effort had to be made to revive the culture and to restore and strengthen traditional oral and performative practices, oral histories and language. His concern was that otherwise cultural decline of the Hawaiian culture would be manifest. Unfortunately, the capacity of reason, fundamental to European enlightenment, did not prevent colonialism and the abyss of racism. On the contrary, it was used to enforce them. The damage that colonialism and racism placed on many cultures is huge, including the Hawaiian culture. Instead, what would it mean to envision an enlightenment apprehensive to knowledge that is embodied and orally transmitted? Speaking of knowledge, which is shared within communities on reciprocal terms, and which is based on a sense of place. May strategies to weave against the grain and to unlearn ignite new insights into cultural practices which celebrate all faculties of the body in performance, including all the senses and oral means of history and forms of cultural transmission and knowing. Aloha.